When Professor Hume introduced me to the reader response theory, I began applying it to various stories and poems. When we read the short story Araby by James Joyce, I found that using reader response was extremely helpful. At this point in the semester, I found that I was successfully making historical connections with the text. In the story, I was able to notice the difference between a child's life in the early 1900s compared to modern life today. On page 121, Joyce discusses how the children walk to school and play in the street. This is very different from children in the 2000s because many parents have stricter rules. Kids nowadays are more tech savvy, therefore they play outside significantly less than kids in the early 1900s. Being able to make this connection helped me better understand the short story, and it also allowed me to think outside of the text and connect it with my life today. Being able to find rhetorical devices throughout the text allowed me to better understand the overall meaning of the short story. For example, in Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway, I found that on page 228, the train station was symbolic to crossing paths. Trains move past each other on tracks that are close together but never touching. They're parallel and go in opposite directions. This is symbolic to Jig and the man's relationship. They can get on one train together to get an abortion, or a different one to keep the baby, or they can go separate ways without each other. Being able to find this hidden symbol in the story allowed me to better understand the conflict between Jig and her boyfriend and how difficult this decision is to make. I believe that blogging taught me the most out of all of the digital tools that we used. It allowed me to think critically about my independent reading book. For example, instead of simply reading through the book without paying attention to rhetorical devices, blogging allowed me to notice the detailed imagery. For example, in the novel Where the Heart Is by Billy Letts, the main character Novalee is 17 years old and she is pregnant. She is watching the majorettes in the parade. One quote from the book says, "Novalee watched them, their boots high-stepping, their batons sailing into the air while they posed, their bellies flat, their breasts high. They were girls with shiny hair and freckles, girls with dimpled, wide smiles, their faces too young, girls who were Novalee's age, girls who would never be as old as she was." This section of imagery allowed me to imagine Novalee's envy because the majorettes are her age and she knows that she doesn't look like them at all. It's significant because it shows that Novalee is growing up faster than most teenagers. She is pregnant and homeless and needs to learn to live on her own. Letts shows the audience that Novalee is envious of the majorettes' lives through imagery. Experiencing literature taught me how to properly analyze text through questioning, building connections, and applying reading strategies. In my Art of Thinking class, we learned to question the validity of arguments. This class required critical thinking because we had to analyze different texts and pose questions. Our English class taught me how to critically think, helping me improve in that particular class. I felt that the hardest story to critically analyze was The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. It was the first piece of literature that we analyzed, so I struggled with the concept at first. I was able to find and understand rhetorical devices and theme, but I struggled with the concept of direct and indirect characterization and internal and external conflict. Throughout the semester, after meeting with Professor Hume and practicing more, I had a better understanding and I was able to execute them successfully. My most memorable experience this semester was when we read Cathedral by Raymond Carver. We were assigned to read this story and simply annotate it instead of filling out a critical analysis and reader response worksheet. I found myself annotating the short story by finding rhetorical devices, making connections, and uncovering symbols. For example, on page 367, the husband says to Robert, "The truth is, cathedrals don't mean anything special to me. Nothing. Cathedrals. There's something to look at on late-night TV. That's all they are." At the end of the story, I figured out that the cathedral was symbolic to enlightenment and suggests the idea of being reborn. The husband at first sees nothing special about cathedrals, but after he closes his eyes and draws one with Robert, it puts him in the blind man's shoes and makes him realize that there is more to life than the concept of seeing. My aha moment was when we were assigned to pick out an independent reading book of our choice. I asked my mom, who is an avid reader, for some book recommendations. She told me that if I wanted a book with humor and romance, to read Where the Heart Is by Billy Letts. I fell in love with the book. At the end of class, I was always left wanting to read more. Having the time to read a book of our choice in English class reminded me of how much I loved to read. Before high school, I would read every night before bed, but as life got busier, I forgot about something that I loved so much. This reminded me that it is so important to take some time out of our hectic week to sit down and indulge in a good book. It also reminded me to always strive to be the best reader that I could be.